Did Jesus actually rise from the dead, or is that just a nice, good story? That's what we're going to be checking out today on Hold True Apologetics. Hey everybody, Dennis Storm, and welcome back to Hold True Apologetics, where we seek answers to tough questions. Since Easter was yesterday, we want to deal with the question, did Jesus actually rise from the dead, or is that just a story we tell ourselves? Well, I want to look at one passage from the Bible and look at three common objections people will bring up to the resurrection. The passage in 1 Corinthians 15, let me read you it. It says this, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He was raised on the third day in accordance to the Scriptures, and that He appeared. So this was an early Christian statement or declaration of faith. And what are they stating about Jesus? They're stating that Jesus died, that He was buried, that He rose again, and that He appeared to them 3 days later. Well, with that in mind, let's look at the three common objections. All right. The first is the apparent death theory. The apparent death theory states that Jesus didn't die. That Jesus didn't die. Well, there's many issues with this, not just biblically, but also historically and medically. All right. So let's look at briefly just some details and ask, could Jesus have actually survived this? Could Jesus have actually survived this? Before He's crucified, He basically had no sleep. Then He was whipped with the cat of nine tails, which many people would have died from. It's a horrible weapon of torture. He was beaten, His beard was pulled out. He was forced to carry His cross, which would have been really heavy. And then they had nails drove through His wrists and His feet. After that, He was crucified actually by Roman guards who were expert executioners. They weren't amateur, they knew what they're doing. Pilate told the Roman guards to confirm that Jesus was dead, so they put the spear through His side. Blood and water came out, was an indication that He was dead. After He was dead, they pulled Him down, and then He was wrapped with like 100 pounds of linen, which was Jewish custom. He was laid in a tomb. A big stone was rolled in front of it, and that was guarded by Roman guards. Now, with all that, just some detail, there's more in there. It's pretty hard to conclude that Jesus actually survived that. In fact, the Journal of American Medical Association, looking in more detail, could Jesus have survived the crucifixion, they stated this. The weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to His side was inflicted. Interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die, but only appeared dead, are at odds with modern knowledge. What are they stating? They're stating that not just historically, but medically, Jesus could not survive. He would have been dead. So the first, the apparent death theory doesn't hold any weight. The second objection is the stolen body. The stolen body. What is a stolen body? Well, it is what it states. They believe that people stole the body from the tomb. After Jesus died, He was laid in the tomb, the people came and stole the body. The disciples stole the body. All right. Now there's many issues with this. First off, let's just look at the disciples. After Jesus died, where were the disciples? The disciples were hiding in the locked room in fear of the authorities. That's seen in John chapter 20. Now, this is the disciples. And even when Jesus was arrested, what happened? The disciples abandoned Him. They just left Him. There's no one mentioned at the cross, all right, except for John. So they all left Him. They all abandoned Him. They were afraid. They were fearful. And now you're telling me all of a sudden, after He's dead, they decided they want to go steal the body? That doesn't make any sense. Not only that, how can these people get past Roman guards? They wouldn't have. They couldn't have. Right? They would have been stopped. But say they did get past them, which is very far-fetched, and they did steal the body, which is very far-fetched, then they did declare that He rose from the dead. Why then would they suffer and die martyrdom for what they knew was a lie? Sean McDowell concludes this. He says, their willingness to face persecution, talking about the disciples, and martyrdom indicated more than any other conceivable course the sincere conviction that after rising from the dead, Jesus did appear to them. So what's he stating? He said the fact that they suffered and died, a martyrdom, is evidence that they didn't steal the body, because they would not suffer and die for what they knew was a lie. So then the third objection, so we got the stolen body, the second objection. The third objection is hallucination. The hallucination or vision theory, which is basically stating that the disciples and all the other people that said they saw Jesus really just saw a hallucination or a vision. Well, let's ask, is what the disciples and the other people experienced line up with what we know about hallucinations? And Peter Kraft and some other people did some research and looking into this. Are they the same thing? And this is what he concluded. He said hallucinations are always private and individual, while On the other hand, the appearance of Jesus was not private and individual. It was to many different people, even actually over 500 people saw them. So that's the first off. Second, Jesus appeared over a long period of time, 40 days. Hallucinations don't last long. Okay, those contradict each other. Alright, well, then Jesus actually appeared more than once in many different locations. Well, hallucinations don't appear often more than once and not in many different locations. Well, those contradict each other. Well, Jesus ate with them, as seen in the Bible. He ate with them. Hallucinations don't eat. Then Jesus also was able to be touched. Hallucinations can't be touched. So we see what the disciples experienced does not line up at all with what we know of hallucinations. So the disciples did not in any way experience hallucination or a vision. All right. Additionally, N.T. Wright, who's done a lot of work into this, he said the disciples didn't even have in their frame of reference this idea that Jesus would rise from the dead. So they wouldn't have made up the story. They wouldn't have made it up if Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead. In fact, if they had experienced a vision, they wouldn't then conclude that Jesus rose from the dead, because to them, if they saw a vision of someone, that was actually not an indication that they're risen, but was an indication that they were dead. He states this: visions meant precisely as people in the ancient and modern world have discovered that the person was dead and not alive. He goes on to state, no matter how many visions they had or would have had, the disciples would not have concluded that Jesus had risen from the dead. So you see what he's stating here. He's saying if the disciples had had a vision or hallucination, they first off would never conclude that Jesus now was alive. They would conclude that Jesus was dead. But what do we have in the disciples? We have them preaching and teaching that Jesus is risen from the dead. And their experience of seeing Jesus is not that of an hallucination, but seeing an actual risen person. Now, the three common objections that we saw, the apparent death, stolen body, hallucination, they fall flat. All right, they fall flat. They do not hold weight to the resurrection of Jesus. So what's the best explanation for what we see biblically and what we see even medically with all this stuff? What is the best explanation? The best explanation is the fact that Jesus did in fact die, that he was buried, and that 3 days later his disciples stated that they saw him again. This concludes that Jesus did rise from the dead. We'll hope to see you guys next week. You guys have a good day.